here. What up, YouTube?
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
You're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome. Turn my headphones up. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Monday, August 22nd, 2016. Man, fall is coming. I was driving into town tonight, and it was actually chilly. Chilly compared to last week, where it was like 100 degrees last week. It was like 77 degrees. So it is a beautiful time of the year here in the city of Boston. Looking forward to some cold weather. I cannot stand the heat anymore. I know I'm from the South, guys. I know I'm from Florida, where it gets to 100 degrees in January. I get it. But, man, when I felt that cold air, I was reminded why I never want to live in the south of the Mason-Dixon line ever again. Don't know why I started with that, but that's where I started. Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. All right, so a lot of news to cover. I have to start with So actually, I want to start with some domestic news out of Houston, Texas on yesterday. So we're going to discuss the white supremacist protests in front of the NAACP on yesterday. We're going to talk about Donald Trump and his outreach to his black reach, right? His black exploitation outreach. And I'm going to talk about it from hang on a second, guys. Just realized something here. I am the worst. Let's see if I can fix something real quick. So we're going to talk about it from the aspect of Donald Trump being a buffoon, as well as Donald Trump not being completely wrong. He was not completely wrong. And I don't have a single graphic to back it up, but I have a lot of graphics, not to show you tonight, but I have all the graphics on my Twitter timeline. So you can go there and see all the graphics. That Donald Trump was not absolutely wrong. That does not preclude him from being a pompous prick. But I want to unpack that a little bit. So we're also going to talk about the Saudi-Yemeni conflict that's ongoing. Some amazing footage from a mass protest of hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating. We're going to discuss that and so many other things. I don't want to waste any more time talking about what I'm going to talk about. So let's just talk about it. 857-600-0518 if you want to join the conversation. Before I move any further, I want to thank my patrons. Thank you guys so much. We can't do it without you. I'm telling you, you guys are pivotal to the success, the growth, and the sustaining of the Benjamin Dixon Show. And I want to thank Alex C., who just upgraded his pledge, like he almost doubled his pledge. Thank you, Alex. Corey A. Came in, like gangbusters on yesterday. Thank you for your pledge. Chessie, did I pronounce it right? Chessie, I'm sorry. P, thank you. Jamar, thank you so much for your pledge. I'm trying to make sure I care about everybody. So Claire was on Friday, but no, on Thursday. No, that was Friday. Claire, thank you so much for your pledge. So many people are pledging. It's hard to keep up. Jennifer and Steven. So Jennifer and Steven pledged on Thursday night, right at the end of the show, just in time for them to get the bonus show for Thursday night, which was lit, right? Thursday night was a great show, a bonus show. So both Jennifer and Steven, thank you guys. I want to thank everyone who is a patron and pledged over the weekend. There's so many of you. If I forgot any of you, please message me and yell at me in an email, and I'll make sure to mention you on air. Tonight's bonus show is going to be great, so make sure you tune in to the bonus show, and let's get started. So, yesterday, there's never a day that I can take off. Yesterday, and I'll pull some images up on your screen, there was a protest outside of the NAACP headquarters outside of Houston. And you can see, if you look closely, they have banners that said White Lives Matter. They had a Confederate flag. They had white supremacist images. I mean, they were heavily armed. I mean, they have long rifles. Looks like that's an AR-15 on his shoulder. It was a white supremacist wet dream out there in front of the NAACP. The purpose of their protests, and let's talk about the purpose of their protests. And the leader and organizer of the protests is this man, Ken Reed. And Ken Reed said, and you can see his Donald Trump hat on his head, Donald Trump 2016. He told the Houston Chronicle, "We came out here specifically today to protest against the NAACP and their failure in speaking out against the atrocities that organizations like Black Lives Matter and other pro-Black organizations have caused, the attack and killing of white police officers, the burning down of cities, and things of that nature." All right, let's talk about Mr. Reed. Let's talk about the reason for protests. Atrocities. Some people would consider the ongoing week in and week out killing of black men and women and children to be atrocities. I would agree. The killings of the officers in Baton Rouge and Houston by those two deranged individuals were tragic. I think atrocities is a big word, but maybe he just wanted to use a big word. But they're definitely tragic and something that shouldn't be minimized. But you know what is also tragic are the white people who are killed by police officers, by hyper-militarized police officers. And what's amazing to me is that instead of them protesting the white people who are being killed on an everyday basis, because numerically, not percentage wise, but just the raw numbers, more white people are killed by police than black people. So you would think that they would be, if white lives, I mean, they have a banner, for Christ's sake, that says white lives matter, right? Let's look at the banner, right? If white lives actually matter to them, you would think that they would protest police officers over reach of their authority and their abuse of the people, but they don't do that. What they do instead is protest organizations like Black Lives Matter and, quote, other pro-black organizations. That's because they don't want anyone, particularly black people, to have a voice above and beyond the position that they have relegated us to in society. In other words, don't get out of line. So while they're here and they're protesting and they're trying to make a statement saying they're protesting the NAACP because the NAACP hasn't come out against, no, there's no reason to come out against Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter, if Black Lives Matter is responsible for the atrocity in Houston and in Baton Rouge, then surely this guy's mentor and his beloved Donald Trump is responsible for all the white nationalism that is being fomented to the top of our society right now. Right. Surely these websites, the Conservative Christians Concerned Citizens Council, are responsible for Dylan Roof and the shooting of the 9 people at Emmanuel AME, Mother Emmanuel AME. Right. So we're going to make that kind of jump and attribute the actions of every individual to someone who is espousing, or to an organization that espouses an ideology that remotely comes close to or intersects with, then there's a lot of attribution of blame that must go around, starting with white people and white organizations. Now, that's just me arguing the merits of his argument, arguing against the merits of his argument. In the middle of his interview, Mr. Reed talked about how they're not a racist organization and how they're out here for unity. But they came out with several AR-15s. They came out with the Confederate flag. They came out with white nationalist posters that said white lives matter, because at what point in American history have we ever felt that white lives didn't matter? I'm starting to think that white lives don't matter to white people who won't say anything against police who are killing all these white people every single day. In that regard, maybe white lives don't matter, but it's not because another race is subjugating white people. It's because white people are complicit with the police officers, and they don't want to speak out against white people being killed by police officers, because then they will inevitably have to speak out against the black people that are being killed, or the police officers that are killing black people. So instead of ever treading into the territory where they could find some solidarity in the sense that police officers in general are hyper militarized, they are they in America, we allow our police officers to kill people, and we give them so much leeway to do so and so much benefit of the doubt. So we allow this, and instead of ever allowing themselves to tread into an intersection where they can find commonality with black people, because white people numerically are killed more than black people, but not as a percentage of the population, instead of doing that, they would rather be silent on all of the white people who are being killed. So if white lives don't matter, the only time they don't matter is to white people who will not stand up and stand out and say something against the overwhelming number of white people being killed by police officers. In other words, the very people out there holding a damn sign saying white lives matter, white lives don't really matter to them. Not enough for them to find a scent of commonality with black people in terms of police brutality and police shootings. Now, that's just me being a nice guy arguing against his argument. But the reality of it is, these are just some white nationalist trash. Ask me how I know. Okay, I'll tell you. Notwithstanding the Confederate flag, right? Let's just take a look at this image. Notwithstanding the Confederate flag, because they're going to swear that the Confederate flag is heritage, not hate, right? And even if it's not heritage, even if it's not hate, rather, it's at a minimum the flag of treason, at a minimum, right? But we'll leave the Confederate flag alone, because there's some people who are good Southerners, good old boys from the South who don't mean nobody no harm. They just know all they known all their life was the Confederate flag. All right, we'll leave that alone. But there are two other images in here, and I'm going to focus on one. Well, the phoenix that's on the White Lives Matter banner is an image that's associated with white nationalist organizations. But in particular, I want to focus on the poster that says 14 words. 14 words, since they are here for unity and they're not here for division and they're not here for racism. 14 words, according to the Anti-Defamation League, 14 words is a reference to the most popular white supremacist slogan in the world. And I quote, these are the 14 words. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. The term reflects the primary white supremacist worldview that unless immediate action is taken, the white race is doomed to extinction by an alleged rising tide of color purportedly controlled and manipulated by the Jews. So, Mr. Reed, with your Donald Trump 2016 hat, and you're concerned that the NAACP is not out here condemning the actions of Black Lives Matter, yet and still your organization is out here pounding the drums of white supremacy in its purest form. I don't know if there's anything else to say to you about that. Matter of fact, I know there's nothing else to say about that.
You get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
Caller, you're live on the air.
That's not how.
Yep, that's not how this works. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, Ben, it's Bryce. What's going on?
Hey, Bryce, how's it going, man? What's on your mind?
Doing good. Yeah, the whole White Lives Matter thing, yeah, I saw that on Twitter, and I saw what they were talking about, and just turned away from it. I said, I'm not going to deal with that. And then Trump, that whole speech he gave is just an embarrassment. First of all, the whole Republican Party has ran off the Southern strategy forever. And I know the Democrats have the issues. We understand that. We understand Hillary's
You know I'm coming for the Democrats, too. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Don't get me wrong. I trust me. I know. But for him to act like his party and what he's going to do is going to help people is bullshit. Because
Absolutely.
he cannot say, oh, well, what we need to do, we need more police. That's going to fix the police brutality problem. More police.
Yeah.
No, we're not dealing with that. And one last quick point. Jill Stein, I listened to the radio, my mom listened to the radio the other day, and this lady, black lady, I think she's like independent media, she was critical of Jill Stein because she's protesting about not being able to get into debates. And apparently the lady was like, where was she with Michael Brown and Trayvon and Kwame McDonald? You know, it's fun. She kind of was just critical of, I guess, certain politicians or white, I guess, I would say white politicians, but Jill Stein in general, because she's not, I guess, speaking out about these issues.
Well,
so my quick question is,
where was she?
My quick question is, how do you feel about that? Do you feel, how do you feel about more people speaking out on,
And Bryce, I'm gonna put you on mute, and I'm gonna hang up on you because you're trying to get me in trouble, man. You always call in here. Thanks for the call, man. You always call in here trying to get me in trouble. I'll try to say 30 seconds on that. I don't know where she was. That doesn't mean that she wasn't there because I don't know she was there, but I'll put a challenge out to my audience to see if you support Jill Stein, and I generally do, and I'm going to vote for her. But I would like to know, where was Jill Stein? I told him last week that I'm voting for her. Where was Jill Stein in Ferguson, Baltimore, on any issue prior to this election season? I don't know. So I can't say she wasn't there, but I will say I don't know. And if you do know, please let us know so we can let the world know. All right. Let me be responsible here and go to some international news, or else I will fall down the rabbit hole of white supremacy that is in America right now. It's tough. Let's talk about the conflict in Yemen. And actually, I want to play some footage of a massive protest. Hundreds of thousands of people protesting in Yemen. Let's take a look at this. This is in Tahrir Square, right? Yeah, in the capital of Yemen. Let's skip through a little bit of this so you can just see the magnitude of the crowd. But then towards the end of here, let's play. I want you to watch this one. This is a Saudi airstrike that took place just outside of that massive protest. And as the Saudi jets flew over, the crowd was not moved. The crowd didn't scatter. They stayed there. And the Saudi jets dropped bombs, missiles on top of not the crowd, but on the outskirts of the crowd as a show of force and their ability to violate Yemen's sovereign airspace. I mean, they're in a conflict, and you just can't help but to think, like, if the Saudis had bombed Tahrir Square, like, so take a look at this.
You get nothing.
No, that's not where you go. All right, let's take a look at this. Here we go. This is the bombing in right outside Tahrir Square. Let's see if I can do this.
Son of a bitch.
And there's the So this is the conflict going on. So this is what was going on right outside of the protest where hundreds of thousands of people were. Saudi Arabia had an amazing show of force, amazing and unfortunate show of force in the face of the Yemeni people. So it's still an ongoing conflict that we talked about last week that has the backing of the United States. And in some ways, this is becoming closer and closer to being a proxy war. The Houthi rebels backed by Iran, the Saudi warplanes bombed the rally just outside the rally. And so the Supreme Political Council, which we're seeing, is a coalition between the Houthi movement and the General People's Congress Party, led by former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Saudi Arabia recently resumed bombings in Yemen after months of a ceasefire. And that's what we saw last week at the end of the ceasefire, or as a result of the end of the ceasefire. We saw the bombing of the, I wanted to say church, but the Doctors Without Borders in Yemen. So the ceasefire was brokered by the UN and Kuwait. The war has been both brutal and indiscriminate air campaign waged by U.S.-backed Saudi Arabia. The U.S.'s participation in this has been both very public and disturbing, primarily because of our unwillingness to even correct Saudi Arabia on terms that we put out there for Saudi Arabia, right? Let alone the atrocities, the war itself, the indiscriminate bombings, we'll condemn, if you ask them, we'll condemn the bombing of hospitals, the Doctors Without Borders. But in terms of actually doing something, we've been pretty silent, not only on that, but also the terms that we set out. And it's, for example, on August 11th, the Saudis bombed a critical bridge that ran along the Red Sea coast. And this bridge was a part of the critical infrastructure. And the Saudis had been told by the United States that this should be off limits. And I quote, the U.S. said the bridge was critical to responding to the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Now, not only did they bomb it, but once they realized that they did not bomb it sufficiently, they came back and bombed it again so that they can completely eradicate the bridge, despite the U.S. telling them that this is something that should not be touched. So one of two things: either this was in spite of U.S. demands, or the Saudi Arabian Air Force is that incompetent that they could not comply with America's demands. Either way, America has been mum on our own demands on Saudi Arabia. So not only are we supplying them, and the bombs that we're supplying are being dropped on the people of Yemen, on Doctors Without Borders, but they're also being bombed on critical infrastructure that is necessary for anyone, including the United States or the United Nations, to address the humanitarian crisis. And the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is one of the largest that we've seen in some, I believe, about 14 million people who have food insecurity. So the American assistance for Saudi Arabia that President Obama authorized last month, this is a quote, authorized last March, include refueling, aerial refueling for coalition jets, intelligence and targeting assistance. American tankers offload fuel to any coalition jet, no matter its target. This support comes on top of more than $100 billion in arms sales with Saudi Arabia between 2010 and 2015, and recent deals made explicitly to replenish stockpiles spent in Yemen. And this is according to Samuel Oakford in the August 19th New York Times article. So our aid is expressly to replenish what Saudi Arabia is expending in Yemen. So the question is why is America so complicit? Not just complicit, but co-conspirators almost. But complicit is probably the more accurate word. I'll leave it there for now. Why are we so vested in Saudi Arabia's war with Yemen that not only are we supplying them, but we're turning a blind eye, not just to it's not the first time we've turned a blind eye to humanitarian crises, right? It's not the first time, but we're doing it. But then two, we're turning a blind eye to our own demands on Saudi Arabia. I want to know what you think. So you can leave the comment. You can call in 857-600-0518, or you can leave a comment in the comment section, and I'd like to read what you have to say about that. Yeah, we'll discuss that a little bit more. 857-600-0518 if you want to talk about the conflict in Yemen, or if you want to talk about the white nationalists inside of just outside of Houston. Caller, you are live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question? 510.
Hello?
Yep, this is you. You're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Kyrie King. I'm calling from California.
Hey, how's it going?
I have two questions for you. I heard from a friend that with the Jill Stein, I hope I'm not too late with this, but the Jill Stein situation, somebody said that a third-party person cannot win, no matter what, because it's a Democratic-Republican kind of country and election. And the second question I would like to ask is, have you ever thought of if the United States never got into the 9/11 situation, where would we be right now?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we think about that all the time, right? So more specifically, I answer the latter question, because the first question I talked about kind of ad nauseum here. But thanks for the call, man. More specifically, so I can tie in your second question to the Yemen conversation, right? So obviously, depending on who you talk to, we more or less had no control over 9/11, right? What intelligence we didn't pay attention to, that's a whole different conversation. But we had full control over destabilizing the region by taking out Saddam and for all intents and purposes, destroying Iraq, or at least Iraq's power in the region. You take Iraq out and you have emboldened Iran. You embolden Iran and their relationship with Syria. Now you have Saudi Arabia threatened not only by Iran's influence in Syria, but you also have Saudi Arabia's concerns over Iran's influence in Yemen. And yeah, now you have several proxy wars that more than likely would never have existed, because Iraq was a stabilizing force in the region, if for no other reason that everyone hated Iraq, right? It's not that Iraq had everyone getting along, it's that everyone was an enemy, and Iraq was a buffer between Iran's influence in Syria and in Yemen. And now the Houthi are being directly impacted and supported by Iran. And so the Saudi Arabians, the Saudi people are concerned about Iran's increasing influence. The conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran is ongoing since the overthrow of the Shah. Now I don't remember. Was it 81 or 79? 79. So 70, close enough. The overthrow of the Shah with the Iranian Revolution, bring in Khomeini, and now you have not a destabilized, but now you have relationships that are strained and combative, but buffered by ongoing conflicts between all the nations. You take out Iraq and you break the region. And it's funny, I don't know if this was from something I read. I honestly don't know where I heard this line, but there were questions as to why we didn't go into Baghdad in Gulf War I. And obviously it was something I read. George H.W. Bush made it clear then that if you go there, how are you going to stabilize the region? He understood the role that Saddam Hussein played in the region and the role that Iraq played in the region, and what would happen if you broke that power structure. I guess he didn't tell his son, or maybe he told his son and his son just didn't care what Poppy Bush had to say. All right, 857-600-0518. Speaking of foreign relations and foreign policy, let's talk about Michelle Bachmann. I think I have a picture of her here in some area. So Michelle Bachmann has been saying recently that she is going to be advising a President Donald Trump on his foreign policy. Just want to bring up this amazing picture of her. There you go. So Michelle Bachmann, for those who don't know, she was a Minnesota, she was a Republican from Minnesota. She served in the House from 2007 to 2015, as recently. And so on Saturday at a fundraiser for Donald Trump, she claimed that she is counseling him on foreign policy. So Michelle Bachmann is batshit crazy. Let's just start there. Okay, no, let me be fair. I'll be fair. So even though, let me say it like this, even though Michelle Bachmann is batshit crazy, the one area that she is not as insane as the rest of her compatriots may be foreign policy. Hear me out before you guys lose your mind. And I'm just using this one example as you know, besides her time in Congress, in the debate with Rick Perry, when he was talking about his foreign aid. He was talking about foreign aid and how he would start the budget for foreign aid every year at zero. And Michelle Bachmann actually stepped in and she served on the House Intelligence Committee. She depicted foreign aid for Pakistan as a national security issue, which, as you unpack it, it is a national security issue. She said, quote, "I would reduce foreign aid to many, many countries, but there's a problem because Pakistan has a nuclear weapon," Bachmann said. "We have more people affiliated with Al-Qaeda closer to that nuclear bomb than any other nation." That's actually a very sane observation in the middle of the insanity of 2011 and 2012. Now, we have an even more insane election cycle this year. And while I still believe that Michelle Bachmann is batshit crazy, it scares me even more to think that she might actually be a voice of reason, comparatively speaking, to who Donald Trump surrounds himself with. That should scare everybody, folks. Now, let me remind you who Michelle Bachmann really is. Michelle Bachmann warned that The Lion King was actually gay propaganda. She claimed, and this is from Think Progress's article, 10 of the Craziest Things Michelle Bachmann Has Ever Said, by Elon Green. Number 2, Michelle Bachmann claimed abolishing the minimum wage would create jobs. Okay. Michelle Bachmann claimed that scientists are supporters of intelligent design. I know of a scientist who is like one of the leading scientists in astrophysicists who actually supports that. But that's one out of how many? But anyway, we'll leave that alone. So Bachmann claimed that carbon dioxide, I didn't read this beforehand, folks. She claimed that carbon dioxide is harmless. And Michelle Bachmann claimed that Glenn Beck could solve the debt crisis. This is the woman, human being, who very likely could be a Donald Trump Secretary of State, Michelle Bachmann. But I would, compared to Rick Perry, compared to what Rick Perry was saying, I actually would take Michelle Bachmann over Rick Perry, but that's not saying a whole lot. That's not saying a lot at all. 857-600-0518. All right, let's shift gears here. Let's talk about, let me see. I just feel like I have to be responsible. I have to eat my vegetables before my dessert. I'm coming to Donald Trump in a second. Let me take him off my screen. I'm coming to Donald Trump. All right, something that has not been in the news hardly at all that I've seen. All right, I'm not omnipresent. I don't know. I haven't seen everything, but I've seen very little coverage of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe protests that are being held as a result of the Dakota Access Pipeline. So the protests are there to halt construction of a $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline and is slated to carry 500,000 barrels of Bachmann crude from North Dakota to Illinois. Let me just give you an idea of how long that pipeline would be. And I'm bringing it up on your screen now behind me. And let me pull it up on the main screen here. For those of you who are, wrong button. For those of you who can't realize how long that is, just by knowing, just take a look at the graph from the northwest quadrant of North Dakota all the way down to Illinois, cutting through the Missouri River. It poses a great threat, a great environmental threat. So just outside of Fort Yates, North Dakota, the reason they're protesting is obvious. It should be obvious. But it threatens to contaminate the Missouri River, which provides water not only for thousands of residents on the reservation, but also for millions of people living downstream. So back in April, members of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe launched an ongoing protest camp called Sacred Stone. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers approved the pipeline back in July, and at least 28 people have been arrested in attempts to use their bodies to block construction. They did make the protesters did make a call for all indigenous people, and they received notice from 85 tribal nations in 1 week, 1/6 of the tribal nations in the U.S. I want to play a video of some of the protests that have been going on, and I believe I have the video. It's a short clip, but I want you to take a listen in. This is some of the protesting. Okay. Actually, I think this may not be the video that I... So you can see the police presence as well as protesters, some who are standing in the way. I have some additional photos here that I want to share so you can get a better idea of what's happening there. And most amazingly is the fact that there is very little to any coverage of this, and it's been going on for a while. That's the thing that surprises me the most, is the length of time that this has been going on to little to no coverage. Here's some images here for you. You can see the indigenous nations rallying, and you can see the standoff between the police officers or the state troopers. I don't know if that's a sheriff's department there, standing and protecting the ongoing construction from people who would use their bodies to stop the construction. All right, so there's another action taking place, and I want to share this here. So there's an action taking place on this Wednesday, and this is at the Washington, D.C. U.S. court hearing. So they're asking underneath the hashtag NoDAPL, they're asking for people to show up and support at the U.S. District Court in 333 Constitutional Avenue Constitutional Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C. at 1 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time in D.C. I believe there's one more. Let's see what this is here. Okay. So it's interesting things that are going on around us that are getting little to no coverage. I'm going to get more information on it and circle back to you guys as it continues to go on. Lots of arrests that are happening, etc. But it's amazing. The first question that comes to mind is, I understand why this is important to the Sioux tribe, because this is going to affect them directly. But this is actually going to affect a lot of people directly. And so you would think that there would be more support and more coverage for something like this. But again, I would think wrong. All right, back to some news on the economic front. All right, so this is a story that I want to cover by John Schwartz from The Intercept. And he was talking about Apple dealing with their tax revenue and the taxes that they owe. So Tim, wait a second here. Tim Cook. So it's an age-old story that companies have been doing for a while now, tax inversion, making their profits, or even if they make their profits in the United States, on paper, it looks like their profits are being made overseas, particularly in Ireland. The CEO of Apple has just expressly said that they're not going to pay taxes on the money that's being held digitally in Ireland until they get a tax rate that is that they feel is fair. And the question is, who else in the world could do this besides corporations? Because if you and I waited for a tax rate that was fair, we would be in jail. But that's besides the point. So Tim Cook, during an interview with the Washington Post, said that we said at 40%, at a 40% tax rate, that we're not going to bring that revenue back until there's a fair rate. There's no debate about it. Is that legal to do or not legal to do? It is legal to do. It's the current tax law. It's not a matter of being patriotic or not patriotic. It doesn't go that the more you pay, the more patriotic you are. So Tim Cook believes that there will be a corporate tax reform in 2017. And so until that time, Apple will hold on to its $181 billion outside of the United States. And in hopes that money paid in taxes when the money is repatriated will go to building. We'll get there in a second. All right. There is, I believe, close to $2 trillion of revenue that is sitting overseas right now across multiple corporations and industries for this exact same reason. And he's just being candid. It's perfectly legal for them to hold those revenues overseas until such time that they get a tax rate that is preferable to them, until they get a rate that they like. And I believe the last time we had a tax holiday was underneath George W. Bush. George W. Bush presented a tax rate, I think, around 10%, something extremely low. And a lot of nations repatriated their revenues and paid taxes at a lower tax rate. Now, the tax rate that he quoted at 40% is nowhere near the effective tax rate that corporations actually pay. Right. And the 40% rate that he's talking about had to be years ago, because I believe the corporate tax rate now is around 35%. The effective tax rate on corporations is somewhere around 27%. And so with a tax holiday of 10%, and I'm going off the top of my head, so if I don't have the exact percentages, charge it to my head. But, they saved a tremendous amount of money waiting on these tax holidays. But Tim Cook is not only waiting on a tax holiday, he's waiting for actual reform where there will be a permanent decrease in the corporate tax rate. The bigger problem here is, and not a problem, but the more revealing thing is that he's clear about it, that paying their taxes is not something they see as patriotic. I want to translate that into saying paying taxes is not something they see as their duty as corporations that not only found their start in America, but got their start in America off of the American middle class. Now, of course, they have access to global middle classes, and so that they really have no allegiance to a particular nation. Because they have no allegiance to a particular nation, they're able to gallivant across the globe seeking the lowest tax rate possible and just leaving their revenues there. So far, it's worked out really great for them because there are nations that are willing to engage into this race to the bottom, where they're effectively going to rob themselves of the tax revenues they could get for infrastructure, the tax revenues they could get for programs, the tax revenue they could get for even for defense. Right? Let's talk their language. Every nation wants to spend money on defense. They're not able to get these tax revenues because they're willing to cut themselves as low as possible to make sure that these corporations come to their nation. And so it's a proverbial race to the bottom. And it really doesn't end, because even though Ireland has the lowest rate right now for Apple, there's going to be another nation who's going to be willing to go even lower. And so we'll see every so many years, there's going to be a mass exodus from one nation to another, wherever the lowest tax rate goes. And eventually a nation has to ask itself, is this something we want to continue to engage in? The answer is, if you have enough lobbyists and you have enough money for those lobbyists, to lobby congressmen and senators, then yes, it will continue to be something that they will engage in, but it will continue to gut our coffers to benefit a small group of people who clearly don't believe that their contribution to America through their taxes is something that's a patriotic duty. And the only thing that matters to them is whether it's legal or not. And so obviously there needs to be some tax reform, but not tax reform in the way that they're thinking. We do need to protect ourselves from this race to the bottom. What does that mean? What does that actually look like? I don't know yet. People are, there's some ideas out there, but clearly we cannot continue to be competitive or to compete with nations that can afford to have a 12, 13, 14, 15% corporate tax rate. Especially because a lot of these multinational, transnational corporations found their start in the United States, benefited from a booming middle class in the United States, and now can benefit from a global middle class to the detriment of the United States. And the question is, how long will we participate and how long will we let it go? All right. Last story of the night, I believe. I don't know. I have a lot over here. Let's see. Let's talk about Donald Trump. I think I've covered everything. We ate all our vegetables before we talk about this. But this is actually a really good story. Still caught up. Michelle Bachmann, Yemen. All right, Donald Trump. I'm going to play a clip. I want to play a clip of Donald Trump and his most recent speech. It's about 2 minutes long, but I want you to listen to everything he says. And I'm going to tell you why Donald Trump is so wrong, yet so right. Let's listen in.
No group in America has been more harmed by Hillary Clinton's policies than African Americans. No group. No group. If Hillary Clinton's goal was to inflict pain on the African American community, she could not have done a better job. It's a disgrace. Tonight, I'm asking for the vote of every single African American citizen in this country who wants to see a better future. Look how much African American communities have suffered under Democratic control. To those I say the following: what do you have to lose by trying something new like Trump? What do you have to lose? I say it again, what do you have to lose? Look, what do you have to lose? You're living in poverty. Your schools are no good. You have no jobs. 58% of your youth is unemployed. What the hell do you have to lose?
All right.
America must reject the bigotry of Hillary Clinton, who sees communities of color only as votes, not as human beings worthy of a better future.
All right. Well, let me do this just cause. I'm gonna tell you why I'm gonna clap. All right. Number one, we talked about this last week. Donald Trump is not going to win the black vote. He may have bumped himself up from 1%. Actually, he had already did that. So he already went from 1% to 2%. So I'll give him, he'll get 3% of the black vote. He's predicting that if he were to win in what year is this? 2016, he would get 95% of the black vote by 2020. Really, Donald? No. Donald Trump, as you could see, let me pull this, guys, the leader of the white supremacist group, the blatantly white supremacist group, was wearing a Donald Trump hat. And I only mention that because Donald Trump inspires these people. He motivates these people. They look to him as the leader of the American Nazi Party said of Donald Trump that he presents an opportunity for the values of the American Nazi Party. David Duke, former Grand Master Dragon, whatever they called themselves, of the Ku Klux Klan, feels like this is his opportunity because of Donald Trump. He's thinking about running for Senate in Louisiana. So that's just the racial component, right? Donald Trump will never get the black vote because of the people he motivates and inspires. He should never get he should not even get 3% of the black vote when you see some of the stuff that goes on at his rallies and the people that he motivates. But I'll give you, there's 3% of the people who just would vote for, I don't know, David Duke. All right, that's number one. On the second side of the argument that I made last week is that if you look at the problems in the black community economically, and they always do this. This is where I part ways with Donald Trump again. It's this laser-like focus on cities like Detroit and Chicago and other Midwestern cities that have been gutted out of the Rust Belt. That, you know, Cleveland. God, if you've been in Cleveland, you know, you see industries that have left and they are being run by Democratic mayors. I don't know about Cleveland, but for sure Chicago, Detroit. You know, you look at these cities, they're being run by Democratic mayors, and the life of African Americans in those cities is overwhelmingly dire, right? The condition is dire, right? You do have successful black people. I'm not even talking about the successful black people. We'll get to that next. But this argument that because the black people are in these conditions because of Democrats is disingenuous, because Democrats are running a Republican-like platform in all of these cities, economic paradigm in all of these cities. In other words, if we went with somebody like Donald Trump, not only would the conditions already have been the exact same. If you put a Republican in those cities, not only would those conditions have been the exact same, but they would have been worse, because they would have further exacerbated the conditions that caused the condition of black people in these. Look at the deindustrialization. Look at the outsourcing. Look at the jobs that left these industries, these cities. Look at all of the redlining. Look at the discrimination. Look at all of the things that happened in democratically ran cities. And you want to tell me that Republicans would have done something different? No. They would have done it differently. They just would have done it more and more often and more blatant and just in the open. So this is the problem. This is the real problem I have with Donald Trump, is because he's offering himself as something different. But what's different about him is that what he wants to do is not only a continuation of what Democrats have been doing, but he wants to do it even more. Look at the tax policies that he's offering. Look at the tax code where he's going to gut. Not only he's setting a precedent, right? So we are talking about a difference between federal and state taxes and federal regulations and state regulations. So there is a separation in between what Donald Trump could actually even do to help these areas. But what he's trying to do is set a new paradigm like Ronald Reagan did, and set a new tax code like Ronald Reagan did that would sweep the nation. The momentum would sweep the nation, and you will have that model not only on the national level, but on the state level, where you gut the federal coffers, but you also gut the state coffers. And when you gut the state coffers, we're not gutting them from privileged communities. We're not taking away from privileged communities. We're not taking away from the nice side of Chicago, or we're taking away from the south side of Chicago. We're taking away from Detroit in general, right? We're taking away from the impoverished black communities. When we rob our communities of tax revenues of companies that benefit and profit from those communities, then we leave those communities barren and empty. And not only are they deprived of tax revenue programs that could be funded by tax revenues, but they're also deprived of their capital that leaves the neighborhood. All of that to say, yes, the Democrats have not been a beacon of hope for the black community in a long damn time. But the Republicans want to do even worse, because the problem with the Democrats that we have is the fact that they're not only neoliberal, but they're Republican light. All right, so that's the second part of the problem. Now, actually, that's the two-part problem that I have with Donald Trump. Not only is he fostering racists, so he will never get the black vote, but two, he's offering economic policies that are going to further exacerbate the problem in the black communities. Now, here's where Donald Trump is right. Donald Trump is right because the condition in the black community is pretty effed up. It cannot be generalized. It cannot be said categorically, because you have some black people who are doing fine. And they're going to do fine whether it's a President Trump or they'll do fine whether it's a President Clinton. And then you have those black people who are going to do horribly no matter who's in power. The problem I have is the response that a lot of African Americans had to Donald Trump's statements, because it came from Donald Trump. And because Donald Trump is the new leader of white nationalism, and he's the new leader of all this racial animus that's been fomented to the top of America, black people immediately look at Donald Trump and said, Trump, you've lost your damn mind. I agree. He's lost his mind. But that does not take away from the fact of what he said about the economic condition of most African Americans is true. Does he want to fix it? Hell no. Can he fix it? Absolutely not, because his policies would make it worse. But was it true? Yes. And what happens because of the knee-jerk reaction in the black community, we're like, oh, nah, bitch, we got money. We got plenty of money. You know, you have the comedian George Wallace. George Wallace was George Wallace, the comedian. George Wallace, he said that I'd love to chat with Trump about how black people are all living in poverty, but I can't decide which one of my houses we should be in. Really? Because a handful of black people have made it out of the hood. A handful of black people have made it out of the vestiges of slavery and Jim Crow that robbed us of generational wealth. And if you don't have generational wealth, you have nothing to give to your children. If you have nothing to give your children, they are completely, utterly dependent on what they can build in their lifetime. And as we saw in the article last week, it takes 228 years for a black family to build the type of wealth that the average white family has right now. But because you have a handful of black people who are rich, we're going to turn a blind eye to all of the poverty in the black community. So while everyone was getting all hissy fit over what Donald Trump said, the fact of the matter is what he said was unfortunately pretty accurate. All right, so let me go over some of the data that I have here. And you can find these stats and figures on my timeline. I probably can do it from memory. So while we're complaining about Donald Trump, the reality of it is 27.4% as of 2014 of African Americans live below the poverty line. The poverty line is at $24,000 a year. That's for a family of four. So 27% of African Americans live beneath the poverty line of a family of four of $24,000 a year. Now, I want you to sit there and think about that more than a quarter of black people live below the poverty line. But according to most estimates, $24,000 a year is too low, right? $24,000 a year is based on a calculation formula that we've been using since the 60s, and it's not really representative of what poverty looks like or what economic struggle looks like in America. So the other number that we use is what's called 2 times the poverty line, which puts you at about $45,000, approximately $45,000 a year for a family of four. So at $45,000 a year for a family of four, it's starting to become the accepted measure of you're living in economic struggle, almost poverty, if you're below that, $45,000 a year. The median income for African Americans is $35,000 a year. That, my friends, means that over 50% of black people in America live beneath the standard of poverty in America. But everybody run around saying, nah, Trump, we got plenty of money. No, we do not. The economic situation for African Americans is pretty fucking bleak. And it has been so for it has always been that way. Do you realize that we've only had blips, just little modest blips of economic prosperity in the black community? And it's never a national thing. It's always pockets. You have little blips like Black Wall Street, where you had a couple of African-American millionaires back in the early 1900s. But as soon as we got that shit was robbed and bombed out of existence. And so we have always been an economic subculture in the United States, one that has served the economic benefit of the United States. But now we have some rappers, we have some athletes, we have some actors, and we have some politicians. And all of a sudden, we want to ignore the fact that poverty is such a part of the black experience that as much as I can't stand Donald Trump, as much as Donald Trump is a racist SOB, Donald Trump was not lying. The worst schools in the world are in the black community. The solution is not charter schools, which is something that the Republicans want to bring in, and something a lot of neoliberals want to bring, Democrats want to bring in. But that doesn't change the fact that the black schools, the schools are still segregated, right? Schools are overwhelmingly segregated, not because of racial tensions, but because of property taxes and where you live. So yes, black people are poor. Over 50% of black people live below the poverty line, the 2 times the poverty line. Let's keep going. There's more data. Not only that, but you have, in terms of economic mobility, this is the 62.9% of black children whose families were born at the bottom fourth of all families by income remained in the bottom fourth as adults. In other words, if you're a black person and you were born poor, 62% of us will be poor when we die, when we become adults and then die. Only 3.6% of African Americans actually have the opportunity to move from the bottom fourth to the top fourth of the income scale. As compared to, that's about 1/4. So that's 1/4 of the rate that white children are born in, right? So about 12%, about a little over 13% of white people born in the bottom fourth move up to the top fourth. Black people, 3.6%. But all the while, we have this pride. We have this pride. And so when we hear somebody like Bernie Sanders talk about black people living in the ghettos, we have this knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, no, you racist. No, you got a problem with black people because not all black people living in the ghetto. 50% of us are living below 2 times the poverty line. 28% of us are living in abject poverty, less than $24,000 a year. And I bring up all these numbers in the context of Donald Trump because as much as a repugnant piece of shit that he is, and he will be, even if he's president, he will be president piece of shit, right? But he wasn't lying here. He was not lying. He was not being genuine. In fact, he was being quite disingenuous, but he was not lying. The situation, the economic situation of black people is dire. But we have always allowed racial animus to keep us from unifying with poor white people to fight back against the structural forces that makes poverty systemic, that keeps us poor, that keeps us generationally poor, because we have this knee-jerk reaction to say, nah, bitch, we got plenty of money. And nah, Donald Trump, you're racist. Nah, Bernie Sanders, you're racist. Yes, Donald Trump is a racist, but what he said was absolutely true. And if we keep allowing a couple of rich black people to tell us that everything is fine, that we're going to keep only having 3%. I'm sorry, one more stat. 45% of black children are living in poverty below $24,000 a year. 45%, almost half of our children are living in poverty. Not the 45,000 mark that I said, but the $24,000 mark. You tell me, what the hell can we do as a community when half of our children are born into poverty? And we've got black leaders, black politicians, black comedians, black actors, black athletes running around celebrating all the money that they've got. And we're co-signing it because they've got some money, it means we got money. No, it means that they have interests that are not aligned with ours. And while we're so busy fighting with the wealthy and the affluent black community over race, when was the last time you saw them fight with us on class? I'm out.
The Benjamin Dixon Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
It's Ben Dixon.
If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
That bonus show, the bonus show is up. Make sure you become a patron and come watch the bonus show. See you next time.